And with me this morning is the United States Ambassador to Jamaica, Luis Moreno. Good morning, Mr. Moreno. How are you, sir?
Good morning, Mr. Darby. Pleasure to be here. I've heard a lot about your show. I've even listened on occasion, and I'm a fellow Twitter fan of yours. So it's,
yes, I do.
It's lovely to be here.
Yes, great to have you in Jamaica. And, of course, we have sitting in also is Mr. Polacek, Joshua Polacek. Good to have you sitting in, Joshua.
Thank you, and hello to all your listeners.
He's here to make sure I don't get into trouble.
But I love it. I love when persons get into trouble, Mr. Ambassador.
I kind of like it, too.
Yes, yes. Now, we want to learn first a little bit more about you, Mr. Ambassador. Where you coming from? Where are you born? And
Well, you know, Mr. Darby, I feel very uncomfortable speaking about myself. I'm a very modest person. But I was born and raised in New York City. Son of an immigrant. My father's story is very interesting in that.
That's interesting.
He's a political refugee from Colombia. Oh. He was a medical doctor. Mm-hmm. They had something called La Violencia in the late 50s, where there was kind of the precursor to what was the longest ongoing civil conflict in the Western Hemisphere. Mm-hmm. He came from a very well-off family, a family of politicians. Family, very historic family, but he took up with the peasants and the campesinos, mm-hmm. and he was a doctor with some of the insurgents.
And campesinos is another word for
peasants. Yes, right. Yes, they wanted land reform. This is back in the days before the FARC turned into a Marxist mm-hmm. guerrilla drug trafficking organization, and he was captured. And had it not been for his political connections and his familial connections, I'm sure he would have been executed.
Wow!
But he was kicked out to the United States, and he showed up in New York City. I'm not saying the old cliche story with $5 in his pocket. I'm sure he had a little bit more than $5 in his pocket, but he didn't speak a word of English, and his medical degree was totally useless in New York City. So he spent a long time going to the movies, learning to speak English. And got back into medical school. And when he passed away in 1989, he was the head of orthopedic surgery at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. He was chief of surgery at Richard Memorial Hospital, and he was one of the guys who invented the artificial hip replacement. And both of his sons, yes. which were the first two born in the U.S., myself and my brother, were both in the employ of the United States Department of State. My brother's a special agent, and myself as a foreign service officer. So just a remarkable and inspiring story. My father, he truly is an example of the American dream. My mother was a nursing student. She was born in Cuba from Spanish family, and kind of the world, you know, is a small place, and what comes around goes around, or whatever they say. And my last tour before coming to Jamaica was in Spain. And my mother had been living in Spain after my father died, and she was retired. And I would visit Spain once or twice a year. Mm-hmm. And my mother was concerned about me, even though I was an old man, basically, in the Middle East.
Mothers are like that.
Involved in the peace negotiations, the Arab-Israeli peace negotiations, and later in Iraq. She was always afraid for me. And I called her to tell her that I was coming to Spain and I'd be close to her and see her every weekend, and she passed away shortly after. And the ironic thing, or the sad thing, was one of the first things I had to do in Spain was to sell my mother's property. It would be a little bit unseemly if the number 2 guy in the U.S. mission was selling a house on the Spanish real estate market. So it's one of the first things I did. But kind of a bittersweet story in that my mother did know I was leaving the Middle East, but I never got to see her. By the time I got there, when she was very ill, she had already passed. It was very difficult to get out of Iraq at that time. Mm-hmm. There was fighting near where I was, and it was difficult to get a helicopter, hop on a plane to Amman, Jordan, and then onwards to so it was a difficult time.
Man, but I know that it's quite a sad thing in a way that I didn't get to see her before, but I know she must have been very proud of her sons.
Well, I think it was. You know, we had, my father was really determined we were going to be professionals, and when I told him that I wasn't going to go to law school, he first attempted bribery and said that he'd buy me a new sports car if I attended law school. I had given up on medical school. There's no way I was going to do that. Those guys studied too much. And when my brother decided to become a policeman, he was so upset with both of us he wouldn't speak to us for a while. But eventually he got over it, and when I became a diplomat and my brother became a special agent with the State Department, he kind of came to accept it. And he was here's another ironic thing, Mr. Darby. Both my brother and I, even though I was stationed in Peru in the anti-narcotics efforts, and my brother was the bodyguard for the U.S. ambassador in El Salvador, we both were in New York when my father was killed, and we both were going to see him the next day. And
he
was killed in ironically, he was a traumatologist. He worked in the emergency room.
Yes.
And he was on his way to the hospital for an emergency when he himself was killed in a car accident.
Wow.
And the ironic thing, incredibly ironic thing, was both my brother and I, who was stationed overseas, happened to be in New York and only miles from where the accident occurred. And we had not planned it, but once we found out, it just happened. So.
Yes. Gonna go for the break. When we come back, you're gonna take us on some of your tours.
Sure.
So we can learn about some of those countries you've visited. Welcome back. You're listening to At Your Service here on Nationwide 90 FM, a revolution in media. It's traveling the world. I'm Vernon Darby, your friend, and with me is the U.S. Ambassador, Luis Moreno. Mr. Ambassador, you recognize that music?
Yes, it's a salsa song, and I spent the good first 20 years or so of my career in Latin America. Mm-hmm. I spent many years in Colombia. Where I believe this song is probably Colombian, although they're talking about Puerto Rico at the top of the song. And I also spend a lot of time in Haiti. I did 2 tours in Haiti.
Yes.
And I also did a tour in Mexico and in Nicaragua, although that was kind of a shorter one. Mm-hmm. And traveled, did also 3 years in Peru. So, like I said, most of my first couple of decades were in Latin America, and then I moved to the Middle East. And I also did something I never thought I would do, which was work in Europe. I always thought Europe would be a boring place to work, and I always wanted to be where the excitement was.
The Middle East.
Excuse me?
Where the excitement is, the Middle East.
Yes, but it was at one point. Colombia was big for us when
I know.
I was the director of Plan Colombia when we decided that Colombia was on the verge of a catastrophe, and you couldn't even leave the capital. And the drug trade was slowly suffocating that country. We decided to do something about it, and we started investing large amounts of money. And we got up to the point where we were the 3rd largest foreign assistance program in the world, $1.3 billion a year. Mm-hmm. And we shifted our attention from the Colombian police to the Colombian military, with a large emphasis on human rights, I'll say, because there had been issues in the past. And they managed to overcome. And using also a lot of intelligence operations, we took down the big cartels. And part of the reason that you have this big trouble and all this violence in Mexico is really a direct result of the success that we've had in Colombia.
So what, they have moved the operations to?
Well, what happened was the Colombian cartels, you remember the old Pablo Escobar stories?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I was there for that in the beginning.
You were there? Really?
Yeah, for a young man, I was there. I saw some amazing things. Mm-hmm. I was there when Pablo Escobar car bombed the embassy, and a couple people were killed. And I came back. I was a young guy in my mid-20s, and I said, I want to come back one day and be the director of narcotics for the U.S. Embassy in Bogota, Colombia. Well, not only did I fulfill that dream of doing that and coming back, some 15 years later as the director of narcotics, but also as the point man for Plan Colombia, which was the U.S. government's really big foreign policy move at that time. So I've been blessed in the sense that I've managed to go where I wanted to go over the years and be where I wanted to be and see and do some really fantastic things that really I just look back at my career and see how blessed I am. And to top it off here by being the U.S. ambassador in a lovely country of Jamaica is kind of a fitting cherry on the top of the ice cream,
what
so
a
to
thing.
speak. Yes.
I don't have much excitement here, no. But in Colombia, I know your country pumped a lot of aid into that country, but then those cartels must have filled a gap there in terms of economic activity.
Oh, big time.
Right.
Big time. And so many people were employed in the drug business, either directly or indirectly. And what happened was when we started to get smart about it and not slug it out with them, and we decided to take them on kind of individually attacked, the Cali cartel. After Pablo Escobar was killed, he kind of ran things through violence, something we called, he would tell the Colombian authorities, you're either going to get plata, silver, meaning money,
Plata, okay.
or plomo, which is
plomo.
lead. So you're either going to get silver or lead. In other
bullets.
Words, yes.
Oh,
so in
plata,
other words,
I see.
we're either going to pay you or we're going to kill you. And he ended up doing mainly the latter, killing people. And he had some great bomb experts from the IRA and from ETA in Spain. And he had enough money, an incredible amount of money that I don't know if you've ever watched that show on Netflix, Breaking Bad, when they show these like piles of money, $80 million piled up in cash. Well, this guy did that, but in the end, he lost because he challenged the government in an existential manner, and the government would not put up with it. Then the Cali cartel came, which is probably the most sophisticated, organized criminal organization in the history of the world. They had accountants that had their MBA from Harvard. They had their computer.
Really? That's
Yes.
why they can put up such a
They
good
had
fight.
computers that to this day, the most sophisticated intelligence agencies in the world could not break their code.
Really?
They had applications. They were so organized that they even had receipts that if you crossed the George Washington Bridge, you'd put your receipt on it to get reimbursed for it. It was just an incredible organization. But eventually, again, that was cracked. And at the same time, we were eliminating the raw material, the coca plant. Kind of a controversial thing, but we're using glyphosate or Roundup on massive industrial.
It's chemical.
It's chemical, yes.
But I know there was a lot of
controversy
about using.
I used to. Maybe part of the reason I'm so messed up is I used to drink it on camera to prove that it was safe.
Yes.
I also had an aquarium in my office, and I'd put tablets in there and show how the fish wouldn't die. Anyway, it's the same stuff that's called Roundup that you can buy in any store in the U.S., your corner 7-Eleven. But by attacking them on two fronts, they collapsed. And therefore, the Mexicans who had been controlling the logistics of the Colombian product, they inherited the distribution routes from the Colombians. Because the FARC, the guerrillas, inherited the actual cocaine. Okay, but they didn't have the international contacts to move it. That the Mexicans did.
Yes.
And so the Mexicans went from being logistics and transportation experts to being the actual distributors and controlling and calling the shots, going down and buying. But the Mexicans were kind of divided into different groups, and they were fighting among themselves, and that's why you've had this tremendous explosion of violence. And what we're seeing now, unfortunately, is we're seeing a little bit of shift because we put so much emphasis on the Central American and the southern border of the United States. We're seeing more and more drugs coming through the Caribbean. And that's something that we have to worry about because there's a traditional problem between drugs and guns here in Jamaica and in other parts. And we're seeing an increase in the trafficking in this area of the world, which we really think we have to pay attention with. And
what do you think accounts for this? Is that you think the economies of the various Caribbean countries are sort of going down, so therefore it provides, it fills that void?
No, it's not necessarily internal conditions in that country. It's the external push and pull and demand of the drug trade and whatever is more convenient to them. And they have so much money and resources at their beck and call that they can really bring an incredible amount of money to bear on any situation and bribe and intimidate and do whatever. And also technology, submarines. You see these traffickers using submarines.
That shocked me when I heard about that. I said to myself, then who would they purchase that submarine from? And how do you get away with that transaction, which must cost millions?
It costs millions, but the thing is, if you're a drug trafficker, right, and you're moving massive amounts of cocaine, let's say, you have 5 big shipments of 1 ton each. You can lose 3 out of the 5 shipments and still make a tremendous profit.
Yes.
Many of the hits or confiscations or seizures that happen are because they want to throw the authorities off. So they'll let them take one.
Yes,
and meanwhile 3 are getting through. That's a very common tactic. So I'm very concerned, and I think the President Obama is one of the things that we talked about when we were here, is how do we address, the increasing amount of trends of drug trafficking we see in the Caribbean. Not Jamaica specific, but I mean in the region.
Yeah. And so you have two challenges. There's a demand side, that's the United States, and there's a supply side.
Absolutely. The demand side is really what kills you, because if there's no demand,
then there'd be no need
there'd be no supply. So I think we've done a better job in the United States in the past few years in cutting down on demand, but we still have a long ways to go. And you're absolutely right. The crucial point is cutting down on demand. Mm-hmm. It's a market. It's a market activity, just like any other product.
Drugs, and that is why we're also concerned about drugs, the market developing, because those guys, they become so powerful, they can then ultimately have a significant impact on your political systems.
Well, for countries that have certain infrastructure issues in which corruption plays a role, and you introduce into that equation these cartels that have virtually unlimited resources, the potential for disaster is looming enormously. Mm-hmm. The key is good infrastructure, good governance, and things that we're trying to work here with your government, Indicom and MOCA, mm-hmm. and trying to encourage transparency and for instance the whole FIFA thing. You take a look at that, and I don't want to inject myself into that, but the fact of the matter is that it was U.S. investigators on banking transactions that picked up on this. It has nothing to do with the U.S. upset that they didn't get the World Cup for X year or whatever.
And those transactions took place in the U.S.?
Yes. Right. Most of those banking transactions mm-hmm. took through the U.S. Look at the former, I don't want to get involved in commenting on the case, but the former Speaker of the House, who, a very powerful guy, Dennis Hastert, who I knew personally. I took him into the fields of Colombia in a helicopter and behind enemy lines, etc. He was the most powerful guy, third guy away from the presidency, mm-hmm. after the vice president's the Speaker of the House. And he's just been indicted because he was moving amounts of money, they say, to make payoffs to someone who was blackmailing him, or whatever the case was. It's strictly they got him on a technical banking transaction thing, and that's what happened with the FIFA case.
Yes.
Now, whatever consequences that has vis-a-vis FIFA and all that other stuff, that's not in my purview at all.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And whether you have a motive or not, the fact is if something has been done which is not right, then you take action. Doesn't matter whether there's a motive or not.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. I mean, if when the U.S. government has this big issue it wants to attack, like the Russians in Ukraine, for instance, you'll see all sorts of sanctions. The Senate gets involved. Mm-hmm. It's a big. Every embassy gets instructions to go to their host country and talk about this, or press countries that they're in for a vote at the United Nations. We didn't see any of this thing with the FIFA thing.
Yes.
It's strictly a Department of Justice thing involving banking regulations and so on and so forth. So there's no grand conspiracy here. I can assure you of that.
And, we've talked about this side of the world. I know you have been posted in other countries, and there are challenges there. To an extent, the drug trade is probably helping to fund some of those groups overseas. You have so many places to take us. You have to come back again, sometime.
It'd be my pleasure. This has been one of the most enjoyable media events. I don't even categorize it as a media event. I think it's a very nice conversation.
Yes.
One of the most fascinating places and magical places and places that, again, like I look back at my life and I just can't believe how blessed I've been. It's just rather remarkable. Every fantasy I've had as a teenager reading, novels and travel books and everything, I actually got to live. But the city of Jerusalem, which is
Jerusalem, is that Jerusalem that we read about in the Bible?
Yes, that's Jerusalem.
Oh.
I was a number 2 in Tel Aviv, in Israel, which is about 90 minutes from Jerusalem. Jerusalem is considered by the state of Israel to be its capital. However, it's also considered the capital by most of the Palestinian people, and most of the Arab world in general consider it the capital. So it's politically an incredibly divided city. It's a city that's gone through 2 intifadas with a lot of IEDs, suicide bombers, although that's tapered off, but still tinderbox politically, occasionally violence, but the most fascinating, beautiful, compelling, emotive city in the world. I've seen people of all the three major faiths, be it Christian people, Jewish people, Muslim people, in tears and moved by being either at the Western Wall on the Jewish side, being at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I've seen people fall to their knees in absolute tears, because it's actually a place where if you're a believer, that Christ was actually crucified at this spot. It's also the spot where the old temple was, and it's also the second most holy place in Islam, the Dome of the Black Rock. So you have within about maybe 500 square meters, you have three of the holy most sites in the world's three great religions. And in fact, there's a spot where all three religions basically say, the end is going to take place, and the supreme deity or the Messiah will come back, and each one of the three religions kind of more or less almost agree where that spot's going to be. I mean, I
wonder if they're going to unite.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's of course our dream. That's our goal. I would love to see that. I used to love. I'm a big believer in dialogue. I'm a big believer in being that David walked through, the same streets that Jesus Christ walked through, the same streets that Muhammad supposedly visited. It's just the history just screams out of you in the way the city's divided into different sectors. And to this day, I wear a crucifix from Jerusalem, and I just have extreme reverence for that place and for the Holy Land in general, and how sad it is that it's turned into such a place of strife and violence when it should be the opposite. It should be a place of reflection and spirituality and of people understanding each other.
But, Mr. Ambassador, have you ever asked yourself this question? It seems as if this fight and the strife is all about religion. But sometimes one wonders if it's really religion, it's not more about power, and that religion is just being used as the tool, or what do you think about
Well, maybe some people view religion as power or power as religion. I mean, certainly, if you look, let's take a look at a country which I served in for a year and a half, Iraq. A country which
were you there doing?
I was there doing all sorts of different things, but one of them was to get people to talk to each other, which seemed to be my specialty as I went on in my career, and talking with people who didn't necessarily agree that they wanted to be part of the political system, and they would rather fight. And so my job was to try to get these people to speak to each other. But the whole thing that you see now with ISIS, who are claimed to be the banner carriers for the Sunni, and you have the Shia, who claim they're defending Shia. And Iraq was a country that was divided up by the British, and you had Kurds in the north, and you had Sunni in the west and central, and you had Shia all in the south. And Shia was a great majority, but Saddam Hussein was Sunni.
But these groups of persons, what created that sort of divide? Is it religion, culture?
A little bit of both, but mainly religion. The Sunni sect believes that when Muhammad died, Abu Bakr, who was selected by some council of elders they had, should be the successor of Muhammad. And the Shia believe that Ali should be, who was I believe Muhammad's nephew, should be the successor to Muhammad, and that's caused some Al Qaeda guys and ISIS guys think that Shia are more apostate than Christians or Jews. I mean, that's how extreme this thing gets, and it rips your heart out when you see these things, and you see how the car bombs and just the daily things that go on, and you're powerless to stop it. That's why, I can count the victories on my hand. If I tell you a brief story about a young girl, 15-year-old girl who the United Nations told me had been from a neighboring country that's not known for its neighboring country to Iraq, not known for its kind of liberal interpretation of things. And her father had been arrested as a political enemy of the state, but he managed to flee to Denmark. This 15-year-old girl did not have that, didn't make it to the airport in time. She ran as fast as she can to the border with Iraq and crossed the border, but was taken into custody by people who were sympathetic to this neighboring regime.
Oh.
And the United Nations said, "Mr. Moreno, please help us get this girl out of there. Please, please, please." And I said, U.S. troops are leaving. I mean, we're in the downside of things. I don't know how I can do that. And I didn't sleep that night. And when I got up the next morning, I said, I'm going to try to help this little girl no matter what I do. And I managed to convince my superiors, which was not an easy thing.
One girl.
For one girl to go and do this. And because I was leaving in a couple of weeks, my big boss said, this is your going away present because you did a good job.
Yes.
And I tell you, I can't go into the details about how we did it, but we got that 15-year-old girl back. We had to do some incredible thing. We moved planes, tanks, helicopters, all sorts of things. And she was dressed, when I finally got her, she was dressed from head to toe in black. And she had never been in a helicopter, never been in a tank, never been in an airplane.
Yes.
And I tell you, I had a bunch of very tough guys with me. Some very tough guys, and we got her off the plane to Baghdad and took her to the airport to meet up with her father. These tough guys who were with me, every one of them had tears in their eyes because it was so moving. We moved heaven and earth that day to save that one girl. And if someone asked me, what do you remember most about your 18 months in Iraq? Was it negotiating the status of forces agreement? Was it this, that, the other thing? I'll say no. It was that 15-year-old girl.
Where is she now?
She's with her father in Scandinavia.
Wow.
Yeah.
I wonder what she's doing with her life. I hope she lives a life of helping, others. Because she is still probably alive today and free because someone helped her.
Yes. I get emotional about it whenever I tell that story, but it's a story I in a way enjoy telling. But as I said, the Middle East for me, the sounds, the smells, the atmosphere, when you hear the call to prayer at different times a day, it's a beautiful sound. The sound, the call to prayer, the languages. I learned a little bit of Hebrew. I learned a little bit of Arabic. The food. One thing that in Middle Eastern culture, they're not big on dogs.
Dogs?
Yes.
Mr. Ambassador.
They don't like a lot of Middle Eastern countries don't like dogs. They think dogs are like dirty. Oh. So having a dog in the Middle East is very difficult. Although my dog that I have now, my therapy dog, he was actually born in Israel. But having a dog in the Middle East is the one thing I had a problem with was dogs. I'm a big dog lover.
I love dogs. So they make such great friends, and they are not unfaithful, Mr. Ambassador.
No.
People, sometimes we are, but dogs, oh no. We have learned so much from you, and I know my listeners are just right there listening to this radio. I'm Vernon Darby, and my special guest, on Traveling the World, is the U.S. Ambassador to Jamaica, Louis G. Moreno. So, now, Mr. Ambassador, we only have about probably 2 or 3 minutes left. Just very briefly, tell us about your role as ambassador in those countries, seeking peace, working for the United States of America, and what life was like there with you. I mean, I can almost hear the gunfire, you name it.
Well, I was an ambassador, but in Iraq, you can't be with your family. You have to live kind of in a kind of a bunker thing. And
okay.
We had quite a number of rockets come in and explosions, and we had people killed on the compound, and we had quite a number of people wounded on the compound. So whenever you heard the alarm, you had to take cover. And what happens is that when you get back into the real life, I went straight from Baghdad to Madrid, Spain, and the difference was shocking. And if you see it in the movies, then they talk about people returning from these war zones and getting adjusted to regular life again. It is difficult. You're not the same person. And sometimes it's difficult for your family to understand that or to relate to you. And the people that you serve with, when you're being shot at, when you're being rocketed, when you're being mortared, you become very close to those people. They become your de facto family. And they stay your close friends the rest of your life. So that's something that a lot of people don't understand, what it's like, the stress of that. But again, it's worth it. I mean, in Israel, working out ceasefires between the two sides, letting doctors get to wounded people, letting supplies get to people who were starving, getting American citizens out of danger. I can't think of a more noble thing other than being a doctor, and saving lives. So, like I said, I carried on my father's life-saving work, but in a different way.
In a different way, absolutely.
And I've been blessed to do so.
Yes.
And now I'm blessed even further by being here in the beautiful country of Jamaica, and talking with wonderful people like you.
It's a big difference. And it's really good to have you. And I look forward to getting those messages. I love your tweets.
Yes.
Now, you have another minute, probably 30 seconds, to speak to all those men out there, brave men of America, and some of them are from Jamaica too, not
yes.
Caribbean
Well,
countries.
we had the comfort when we had the comfort here that saw over 10,000 10,000 patients, did 100 operations. We worked on schools. The United States isn't all about flexing muscles and being the bad guy. Most of the time, we're actually on the right side of the situation. And the people in uniform are just regular Americans in uniform, and they're the nicest, for the most part, nicest, most decent people, kids that you ever want to see. I'm very, very proud to have been associated with them in all my time. And I'm very proud you've invited me to your show.
Mr. Ambassador, I've learned so much. I will have to listen to this broadcast again. And my listeners, you can hear it tonight at about 11 o'clock. It was wonderful meeting you, first via Twitter and now in person. And Mr. Polachek, Joshua Polachek, thank you for passing by. All right, gentlemen, so have a wonderful day.
You too.
Okay.
You too.
Okay.
You too.
Okay.
You too.
Okay.